Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what side of the world you're joining us from, and welcome to the launch event of the WBA Insight Pamphlet on the critical role that managing organic waste plays in delivering the Global Methane Pledge. I'm Charlotte Morton. I'm the Chief Executive of the World Biogas Association, which represents the landfill gas, biogas, and anaerobic digestion sectors. We're launching this pamphlet today, 1 year on from the launch of the pledge and a few days before COP27, to remind everyone that this critical commitment made by over 120 countries now requires urgent action on the ground if we're going to achieve it. 2030, the deadline for meeting the commitment, is just 7 years away. A year ago, I represented WBA at COP26, highlighting the urgent need for action on methane emissions. It was actually wholly coincidental that the Global Methane Pledge emerged from that conference, although WBA has been highlighting the importance of methane for well over 3 years. But organizations such as the Global Methane Initiative, who I'm delighted are joining us today too, have been calling for methane action since 2004. In a few days, I'll be traveling to Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, with the same message. If the over 105 billion tons of organic waste produced by human activity every year remain untreated, they will continue to emit methane. Ton for ton, methane is 86 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. What this pamphlet demonstrates is that these methane-emitting wastes must be managed and treated by technologies such as anaerobic digestion, which is often more simply known as biogas, so that we can both prevent the methane emissions emitting from them and turn them into valuable resources that we critically need, such as green gas and biofertilizers. I'm sure I don't need to remind any of you that we're facing energy and food security crises, along with the greatest crisis of all, the climate crisis. Biogas sits at the heart of a circular economy where waste such as manures, municipal solid waste, and wastewater, which together represent 19% of anthropogenic methane, can be recycled into green gas, biofertilizers, bio-CO2, and other valuable bioproducts. By recycling all readily available organic waste, we can achieve half of the Global Methane Pledge, which is to reduce emissions against 2020 levels by 30% by 2030, the equivalent of taking all cars, lorries, and shipping net zero, as John Kerry said when he announced the pledge. And as a mature, sophisticated, and ready-to-go technology, we could reach that potential by 2030, but we do need to have the right enabling environment. We're not alone in seeing biogas as critical to delivering the Global Methane Pledge. Biogas is central to the methane strategies of both the European Union and the USA, the initiators of the pledge, and countries such as Brazil. I'm delighted to say that Tamar Reutemann from the Brazilian Biogas Association, Abiogas, is joining us today to present Brazil's new National Zero Methane Programme that focuses on boosting biogas and biomethane production to tackle Brazil's methane emissions. The Climate and Clean Air Coalition, which is the secretariat for delivery of the pledge, also recognises the huge potential of biogas. WBA sits on the leadership groups of the CCAC's waste and agriculture hubs, which have been set up to discuss how to progress the sectors that can tackle methane. And I presented a preview of this methane pamphlet at their and the GMI summit in Washington, DC in September. However, action on methane cannot just be at the supranational and national level. It also needs to happen at the local level. Cities have a great responsibility in developing the infrastructure that can divert municipal solid waste away from landfills. So I'm delighted that Ricardo Cepeda from our long-standing partner, C40 Cities, is also here today to tell us about all the work that cities are doing to create a zero waste society. Finally, WBA is not only raising awareness of the role of biogas in achieving the pledge, we're also developing our own Make Biogas Happen programme, which is a series of interlinked initiatives that will facilitate the rapid scale-up of the industry, including examples of the regulatory framework that the industry needs to be in place. And in producing that, we hope to collaborate with as many of you as possible to make sure the biogas industry scales up as quickly and professionally as we need it to. And certainly the forecasts are promising. Biogas and biomethane is a star sector in the latest annual energy report from the International Energy Agency, which predicts that the sector will grow between 7 and 11.5 times between now and 2050. That's an annual growth rate of 13% to 2030 and 11% to 2050, which makes it the second highest growing sector after hydrogen. So on that positive note, I'm now going to pass you over to WBA's lead analyst, Leanne Williams, who will be moderating the rest of this event today.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So thank you everyone, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. It's really great to see just how many people we've got online, and we have some really fantastic speakers that I know I'm really looking forward to hearing more from. So I won't take too long just in the intro, but I just thought I'd maybe remind anybody who hasn't been on Zoom for a while that we do have a chat function and a question and answer function as well. So what I'll do is ask that everybody put in any chat or questions, and what we'll do is at the end of the session we'll try and answer as many as possible. So as I said, we've got quite a tight schedule, so I'm quite eager to give our speakers as much airtime as possible. So first and foremost, we have Matt Hamilton, who is co-chair of the Global Methane Initiative, the Biogas Subcommittee, and he is a manager in the waste sector GHG reduction for the Government of Canada. As Charlotte mentioned, the GMI has been focusing on methane action for almost 2 decades. So Matt will share some of the critical work that they're doing. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think I'll just quickly share my screen and get this going. There we go. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me, and I will get going here. So I guess I'll start by talking about methane, why it matters so much. I think a lot of people here are on the same page, but for our organization, there's a lot of benefits to addressing methane emissions, capturing methane, using methane, and they extend beyond the greenhouse gas emissions, but also about air quality and improving human health and worker safety. So there's a lot of great benefits excuse me, to working on this issue. And I think there's an important moment now where many countries in the world are coalescing around the importance of taking rapid action. The Global Methane Initiative is a partner organization. So there are 45 countries that are part of the GMI. And there are also something like 700 or 800 project network members, which are private sector, different organizations, part of the GMI. We work across 3 major sectors: oil and gas, coal mines, and also biogas. And in this case, biogas is talking about agriculture, waste, and wastewater. So those are the main areas. And we've been looking at this issue for many years through this public-private partnership approach. When we look at the Global Methane Pledge, this is a major new development in the last year. Over 125 countries have signed on to the pledge, and that represents more than 40% of global emissions. 34 of our GMI partner countries are also signed on to the pledge. And countries have really committed to this collective effort, reducing emissions by at least 30% by the year 2030. And really moving towards these best available approaches to quantifying methane, and that particular focus being on high emission sources. And so when we look at, what are these high emission sources, The waste, agriculture, and solid waste sectors, the ones I'll hone in on, because that's what we would call biogas in the Global Methane Initiative. Of course, there's more to it than just biogas, but those are 21% of global emissions. So it's a major component. And many of the countries in GMI, outside of GMI, have included methane mitigation strategies in their different plans, whether they be energy or climate plans, also their nationally determined contributions. So there's a lot of growing focus and effort into this. And I think GMI is trying to be part of moving that forward. I think, in some sense, we feel there's a critical role for our organization in helping our partner countries meet their national commitments. So it's one of the most, reducing methane is one of the most effective strategies, in fact, for near-term impactful greenhouse gas reduction. And our partner countries and private sector organizations, we also work with other multilateral organizations, like, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, for example. We have strong relationships. We have a good track record of developing information, tools, like sharing expertise and resources. And a lot of those tools and resources are actually on our website, if that's something of interest to you. So again, working towards meeting the Paris goals, the Global Methane Pledge, et cetera. Since 2004, GMI has been active. We've grown from 14 to 45 partner countries. We've leveraged hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for projects and training. We've got a lot of project network members that are active and sort of sharing their expertise and leveraging the interactions to create projects. We've also done many assessments, different types of pre-feasibility studies, feasibilities, those kinds of things, trying to assist partner countries by sharing resources and information. We've done a lot of training over the years as well on methane mitigation. And we've got a whole host of tools and resources on our website that are there for anyone interested, and many of them in several languages. We also hosted, with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, a forum in 2022. It was in Washington, D.C., just in September. This was one of the first times getting people together in this way since the pandemic, and so it was a great opportunity. There were about 450 people in person, 850 including virtual, policymakers, industry leaders, technical experts, and so on from around the world, many countries represented. There was a lot to take in. The plenary sessions and joint technical sessions, in fact, were all recorded, so you can access those through the Global Methane Initiative's website if you're curious to see. But the agenda covered agriculture, wastewater, of course, oil and gas, and mining, coal mining as well. But there was great exchanges, lots of discussion, and I think new understanding among some of the folks that were maybe a little new to the subject. So people were highlighting lots of interesting innovations, solutions, whether it be on mitigation, measurement, how to scale up activities, whether through policy and finance, different types of cooperative arrangements. There were some large funding organizations that were part of that, such as the Global Methane Hub. So I think overall, this was a great forum, and I encourage you to go check out some of what we discovered there. If you are interested in following GMI, there's some links on the screen there that you can follow, and you can also go through to our website. Thanks very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. I've spent quite a lot of time actually on the GMI website, and I've really stressed that it is a really interesting, there's a real wealth of tools there, and would recommend that anybody who is interested in going online and exploring them further, because there is a lot there. So thank you very much. So that we do have one question, but I think we'll leave all questions to the end just to give time for all speakers. So if I now will present through just a kind of quick snapshot of our pamphlet, as Charlotte mentioned, as you're all aware that we are launching it today. Really exciting time to start launching this one year on from the Global Methane Pledge. So I'm just going to share my screen there and hope that everybody can still see. So yeah, so really looking forward to taking everybody here through the pamphlet. I think we hear a lot about the clock ticking down to 2030 and beyond, and you know, the climate crisis coupled with the energy security crisis and food crisis is all really coming around again and again. And I think it really does, they all go hand in hand. And I think one of the things that we're very conscious of at the World Biogas Association is how actually the solutions to all these go hand in hand. And for us, when thinking about the Global Methane Pledge and the urgent action needed to tackle all these global issues, why biogas really does make sense. So we pulled together a pamphlet to really help, I guess, shed some light on what methane is, the harm that it causes, you know, why it's really necessary to tackle, and then looking at why biogas and anaerobic digestion is such a crucial solution. So what is methane? As I know Matt has said, it's a really potent, short-lived climate pollutant that really traps in a lot of the heat in the atmosphere. It's quite hazardous, it's very potent, and over a 20-year period, it can be up to 86 times more damaging than CO2. So it's really crucial that it's a very, very crucial molecule that we really need to tackle. In 2020, 332 million tonnes of methane were emitted by anthropogenic sources, and this really equals to 30 billion tonnes of CO2 over a 20-year period. So what we've sort of worked out is that over a 20-year period, we think that globally methane will be responsible for up to 45% of man-made global warming. And this really does drive home the need to act. So by targeting methane emissions, we can really make a difference and really stand the best chance of achieving that 1.5 degrees goal. So what has the trend been so far? Since June 2020, as we said, 332 million tonnes of methane was emitted, according to the GMI from man-made sources. And if you really look at the pattern over the past sort of 20 years, we can see that not only have we failed to tackle methane emissions, but actually we've seen a real rapid growth in methane emissions. And this really demonstrates, again, the real need to act rapidly and drastically. And this is really where we see the Global Methane Pledge coming in. Again, to reiterate the 1.5 degrees limit to global warming, it's very much emblazoned in all of our minds, but time is running out. And so what the pledge has done is it's set a really ambitious but crucial goal to help cut methane emissions by 30%. And in doing so, we hope that the pledge would help reduce global warming by more than 0.2 degrees by 2050. And so we also know that by tackling global warming, we also can see that by reducing methane emissions, it would improve health outcomes, food security, energy security, as we've spoken about sort of briefly before. So where does it come from? Again, I won't spend too much time on this because I think Matt summed it up quite nicely. But there's 4 key sectors in the way that GMI represents global methane emissions. So that's the poorly managed organic waste, so untreated sewage, storage of livestock manure, rotting waste in landfill. And that's really where we think AD comes into its own, but also oil and gas, coal mines, and then other sources such as enteric methane, rice farms, and industrial processes. So what is the solution? I don't think it will come as any surprise to anybody here that, you know, we really do believe that anaerobic digestion is the real key to really unlocking a significant proportion and really capturing a real proportion of the methane emissions. Ultimately, you know, as an organisation, and I think globally we all recognise that the imperative is to reduce waste emerging in the first place. It's fundamental, and we really need to work hard to preserve the value in our resources and make sure that we're really vastly reducing the amount of wastage that we're seeing arising. But ultimately, it's not always possible, and those reductions in waste can take time, and therefore we need to source suitable, sustainable technologies in order to process these wastes and to produce energy, biofertilizer, and bio-CO2. So technology-wise, there are 3 key solutions that are out there in terms of managing the organic waste, be that incineration, which I think is quite clear is an unsustainable technology. It's classed as an unsustainable technology within the EU, and C40 cities themselves, which we've quoted in the report, identify it as being inexpensive, inefficient technology, and it really does require strict environmental regulation. Then there are sustainable technologies out there, and ultimately we believe that we must make the most out of the resources in waste and extract the most value out of those resources, including the energy, and as I've said, the biofertilizer and the bioresources as well. So just going into AD in a little bit more detail, we do include this in our pamphlet really to drive home the messaging to anybody who might be reading through this and not having come across AD before. But as a technology, it takes organic wastes and sustainably treats them through a process called anaerobic digestion. It is a ready-to-use technology. It produces, it takes organic feedstocks, so the ones mentioned by Matt and the GMI, food waste, agriculture waste, manures, slurries, all sorts of different organic wastes, and turns those into really valuable bioproducts, such as I've said before, biogas, biofertilizer, and bio-CO2, as well as other biomaterials and biochemicals. So, as I've said, biogas can be really used and harnesses these methane emissions as a source of renewable electricity. So in the first instance, in its original form, it could be used to produce electricity, or it can go through a further upgrading process and split out the molecules into the biomethane, which can then be used as a direct substitute for a renewable natural gas, and bio-CO2, which can be used in industry. So things like fire extinguishers, it can be used in the food and drink industry, or it can also be used and sent to geological storage, which actively reverses emissions from the atmosphere. So WBA, as some of you may or may not be familiar with, have produced a range of reports through the years and have studied and quantified the global potential of AD. And in our data, using our data and our figures, we estimate that AD could mitigate up to 50% of the methane emissions required through the pledge, if the industry is to achieve its full potential. Of course, this will require rapid expansion, and we really hope that the renewed focus and the real crucial focus on methane emissions will help drive that expansion and allow for industry and for governments, for countries and organisations to really harness the value of those wastes. There's never been a more important time for biogas, not just in avoiding methane emissions, but also in its subsequent impacts in terms of the wider supply chain. So the use that these co-products would have on mitigating global emissions downstream as well. So energy, food and climate security will always be on the agenda, and it will always be a really crucial issue that we need to solve. And we really do believe that AD is the technology that sits at the heart of the circular economy and is at the heart of the solution. One of my colleagues should be posting the link to the report. I would really recommend that you have a look at it, take some time to go through it. Please do take snippets from there and reach out to us if you have any questions or any comments on those. So I think I've gone over, I think I've just made it to time. So I will now stop sharing my screen. And I'd really like to hand over to the next speaker now, who's Tamar Reutemann. So she is Executive Manager of A Biogas from Brazil. As Charlotte mentioned previously, Brazil were one of the first countries to produce a methane program off the back of the Global Methane Pledge, which does heavily focus on boosting biomethane production to reduce methane emissions. So really exciting opportunity. And I welcome Tamar to join us and start sharing her screen.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, the WBA, for the opportunity. And I congratulate you to explore the Global Methane Pledge. We need to discuss this more. I believe we still have a long way to go to implement what was pledged in the last conference. And we need to show numbers and to show results. Let me share my screen. So Brazil, our association, Brazilian Biogas Association, represents today more than 130 companies. We have a mission that is equal to all of the associations, biogas associations. I believe it's to put out regulation, to establish government engagement in biogas and biomethane, establish financing options, and raise public awareness of this sector. So now we have, as I mentioned, more than 130 companies in the association. Some of them Brazilian, some of them are global companies. And we see a lot of interest in this market in Brazil. And I'm going to show you why, because we have an enormous potential for biogas production. This is our potential. We are still producing around 2% of the total potential of biogas, but we could be producing 120 million cubic meters per day of biogas, actually of biomethane equivalent. And this is a huge amount. Here in Brazil, we have plants which we have characteristics of higher installed capacity than in other countries. We have here plants with 20, 30 megawatts of installed capacity. And so we have big plants, mostly in sanitation, in landfills, but sugarcane industry is where we have a really great potential, more than 50%. So I'm sorry. So we can see that we could be producing 57.6 million cubic meters per day in this in this industry. It is considering some residues that today are not used to generate energy. So the sugarcane is used today to produce sugar, ethanol, and bioelectricity using the bagasse of the sugarcane. But here we are talking about other residues, such as the filter cake, the vinasse, and the straw. And this could generate a huge volume of biogas. In second place, animal manure. Our protein production is really huge in Brazil, so we could be producing a lot of biogas. And these industries where we believe could be generating a lot. It is generating a lot of impact, negative impact for the environment, and could be the one who is giving more of the sustainability and contribute a lot with the methane plant, which is methane reduction, to contribute with this reduction in the world. In third place, agriculture. The least one, with the lowest volume, is the sanitation, but as I mentioned, is where we are mostly producing now, where the biogas production, the biggest volume of biogas now in Brazil comes from this sanitation. To have an idea about how this is important and how this potential could, what this represents, we could be generating around 35% of the electricity demand today in the country, just with these residues. And it is important because we know that in some countries there is a biogas production from energy crops for a culture specific to generate biogas, and here we are only talking about residues. And we also could substitute 70% of the demand with all this potential of biogas. So it's really important. And what we believe that is the biogas sector could take advantage of the regional distribution of residues. The country is really huge. We have a distribution of different residues in different areas. In the south of the country, for example, we have a huge protein chain production. So this would be really interesting to develop. But in some regions, the sugarcane industry, and mostly in all of the states, we have municipal solid waste that, of course, could be used to generate biogas. But we have some specificities, and we have the expertise to make profit and to produce biogas from all of these residues nationally. And so how do we see the biogas in the Global Methane Pledge? So the Global Methane Pledge, it has the goal to reduce global methane emissions by 30%, which is around 100 million tons of methane. I took these numbers from the presentation from Leanne that we received before. And the Brazilian goal would be to reduce 6 million tons of methane. So from this 100 million, we have calculated that Brazil should reduce 6 million tons of methane. And so this is, for us, it's really interesting that to see that just with biogas, we could achieve this goal without talking about the methane reduction in other sectors, as Leanne has showed, in forests, and there are other ways of reducing methane. But just with biogas in Brazil, we could provide all the reduction necessary. So our expected production in 2030 is 30 million cubic meters per day. As I mentioned, we have the potential to produce 120, but our expectation in biogas, in our calculation, we believe in the next 8 years, we will be able to move from around 4 millions today to 30 millions. And these represent a reduction of 2 million tons of methane, which represent around 33% of the goal. But if we produced everything, all of the potential, it could generate a reduction of 8 million tons of methane, which represents more than 100% of the Brazilian goal. So we could be generating credits and explore these credits to other countries that need to reduce methane emissions as well. And what is the Zero Methane program in Brazil? So I need to say that the program was established in the beginning of the year, but there's still a lot of regulation implementation to do. The program was created with the objective to incentivize with lines of credit, with financing, with research and development, a lot of actions considering biogas production, such as the implementation of the biodigesters, the implementation of biogas production, purification, and compression systems, the green corridors for vehicles that would be fueled with biomethane, especially heavy-duty vehicles, and incentives to substitute heavy-duty vehicles from diesel to biomethane, natural gas and biomethane for sure, because it is the same technology. And the idea in the creation was in this Zero Methane program was to establish a methane credit different from a carbon credit, but a methane credit that would be integrated with the carbon market in the voluntary or regulated carbon market. And the idea was to incentivize generating additional receipts and for the producers which would invest in these projects. The idea is to make a market for these methane credits together with the carbon credit, the voluntary or regulated. I need to tell you that the program is still hasn't been. We don't have a lot of new information, and we need. I believe you have known that we recently had the elections here in Brazil, and the government will change. The president will not continue. So the team that was working with this program, we don't know what will happen if the new team is going to continue with these policies, this program. We're going to be working with the new team, so they will put this, so they will continue, even if it's changed a little bit. But if we want them to put out the regulation, to establish what is needed to implement the zero program methane, I believe the new government knows and has the understanding that Brazil could be a leader and could be needs to be more direct in sustainability policies. So with the NDCs, and we believe they are going to promote this agenda. But I don't know if this program specifically, okay, so but we are going to work with them to do that, and this is a really important thing for Brazil. And this is my last slide, is that to show that biogas, we believe that biogas can promote significant reductions in the Brazilian emissions, and our emissions comes greatly from land use change and forests, but a lot of them from farming, energy, residues, industrial processes, and biogas can reduce emissions in all of these sectors. So we believe that biogas is totally in this agenda of emissions reduction, and we're working a lot to put that in place. So I think it's that. Okay, also in the biogas and the carbon market, we believe that the carbon market is essential to do that. So the methane zero program will establish this methane credit, but the carbon market is really important to develop the projects, to develop the sector, and to make sure these investments will happen. So we believe a lot in pushing the agenda of a regulated carbon market in Brazil, and we believe the next government may be more pro to do it. So this is what I wanted to bring today. I'm available for questions, please. And thank you so much, Leanne and the WBA, to the opportunity.
Thank you so much. It is really exciting to see just how much of an impact biogas alone can have in the country's commitment to the pledge. So really hoping as well that the change in government does bring even more positive things. I think we can appreciate how difficult changes in government can be and the knock-on impacts, but really, really excited to see what comes out of Brazil next. So thank you very much. That leads me on to our last speaker. So we've got Ricardo Marquez from C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group. So Ricardo is the head of Solid Waste Initiative, and he will be sharing with us the key work that cities around the world are doing to address methane and the pathway towards zero waste, which I believe was launched at the World Mayors Summit in Buenos Aires about 2 weeks ago. So over to you, Ricardo.
Thank you, Leanne, and thank you for the invitation. As you mentioned at the beginning, C40 has been a long-standing partner of the World Biogas Association. We've also collaborated significantly with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and the Global Methane Initiative, so that our work has been informed and guided by a lot of the developments that those organizations have made. Today, I want to talk to you about our latest research and findings regarding the state of methane in C40 cities. My name is again Ricardo Marquez. I'm joining today from Mexico City, but I oversee the technical strategy development at C40 cities for our global food and waste program. Just for some background, the C40 Cities Network is a network of mayors of nearly 100 world-leading cities collaborating to deliver the urgent action needed right now to confront the climate crisis. And together, we believe that we can create a future where everyone, everywhere can thrive. Currently, C40 is comprised of almost 100 cities that collectively add up to about 700 million people. And we believe that this showcases the tremendous potential that those leading cities can deliver in the climate agenda. I will skip some of the background regarding climate change and methane, as my colleagues have done a much better explanation than I could possibly do before. But I would like to highlight one point that I think it's important. When we talk about methane and all of the opportunities it opens in delivering fast action, I like to raise a fact that every effort that we make to reduce carbon dioxide helps to not make things worse. However, because methane is such fast-acting greenhouse gas and also an atmospheric pollutant, reducing methane can actually make things better, which is why it is so important that global stakeholders, governments, and the private sector can collectively deliver an ambitious program to reduce methane emissions. And the fact that makes the distinction between the different kinds of impact that CO2 and methane have has to do with this front-loaded impact that methane has. One of the consequences is that most decision makers are taking decisions guided by emission inventories, and we know that emission inventories conventionally use the global warming potential of 100 years to track the long-term impacts of non-CO2 gases. And this massively underestimates the near-term impact of short-lived greenhouse gases like methane. This means that many of the front-loaded impact is being hidden behind the GWP 100, and this risks to cross over many of the still uncertain climate tipping zones, but risking unleashing some irreversible feedback loops, which brings all of the more urgency to fast action on methane and a better reflection of its powerful impact by relying on GWP 20 as a guide for decision making. And all of this is slowly being realized in the global climate diplomacy sphere. And we like to use this slide to showcase a quote from Special Envoy John Kerry, saying that cutting methane is the single fastest strategy that we have to keep a safer 1.5 degrees centigrade within reach. And also bringing attention to the developments that have come since last year in realizing the critical urgency to address methane in the launch of the Global Methane Pledge at the last COP, which a number of cities and partners have agreed to curb methane emissions by 30% by 2030, which is backed up by over 100 countries, including the US, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Brazil, Japan, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and South Korea. I'll skip over this slide, as I'm sure you are all familiar with the main sources of methane, but I will bring the focus that in consideration of this understanding of the sources of methane, C40 has performed an assessment of the methane emissions in C40 cities and assessed their impact framed against the 2030 global methane pledge. To remind everyone that C40 works with our member cities to prevent and minimize waste generation, restricting specific single-use items and non-recyclable materials, raising awareness of waste, to change behavior and strengthen circular lifestyle through zero waste consumption options. We also support cities to improve waste management planning and operations, implement solutions that are locally compatible, sustainable, affordable, and resilient, and that maximize greenhouse gas emission reductions. One of the facts that we like to share, building on all of this new research on methane, is the massive impact that now we can easily compare with things that become very visual. Because of we have now a much better understanding of the impacts of solid waste management and methane, we can make a very straightforward comparison that showcases the huge potential in improving waste management in cities. We know now that for disposing 1 kilogram of food waste in landfills or dump site delivers the same climate impact as burning 1 liter of gasoline or petrol, however you know it in your location. This is an incredibly easy and visual comparison to understand the huge impact that sending food waste and organic waste to disposal is having on our climate and our environment. We have performed, building on the emission inventories that are published by each C40 city, an assessment of their methane sources and their methane distribution. What we have found is that solid waste is overwhelmingly the main source of methane in cities. But we've also found that as the significant majority of these methane emissions from solid waste are coming from the global south. Almost 2/3 of those methane emissions from solid waste are being produced in the global south. And this is concerning because those cities in the global south are also facing some of the biggest challenges when it comes to sustainable waste management and have the fastest growth trajectories, meaning that this situation is only going to exacerbate if significant changes are not implemented. The next thing that we know is that as part of our climate action planning program, every C40 city has had to develop a robust and overall and sectoral emission trajectory. Global South cities that have committed to the deadline 2020 targets have received technical support to develop these trajectories towards 2030 to inform their climate action planning process. Because of these programs, C40 is uniquely positioned to forecast estimated emissions by sector to 2022 and 2030, ensuring a common comparison methodology and baseline for cities that have been part of the CAP Technical Assistance Program. This data set is incredibly valuable to guide city decision-making and to showcase the impact that methane emissions are going to have now and how that growth is going to behave in the next years. The most visual impact is that we now can estimate that those global south cities that are part of this program right now is 33 cities in the global south are going to put 20 million tons of methane by the end of this decade. As you saw in the slides of my colleagues, this can have massive impacts in the global climate system. But because we know, we can trace how those emissions trajectories are behaving individually and collectively, can help our prioritization strategy to show which regions are of the biggest urgency and where we need to focus our resources. One of the things that we have found is that while Africa is not the main producer of methane right now, because of their fast fast growth in population and economy, they will become the main producer of methane from solid waste by the end of this decade. So that our technical support programs are currently being focused in Africa, but they also need to expand to other regions like Latin America and Southwest Asia. And the strategy that we are looking to implement by supporting those cities has to do with all of the actions that you are all familiar with, which is implementing a foundational baseline of achieving universal collection, implementing source segregation that focuses on diverting organics and food waste reduction, and implementing the large-scale organics treatment infrastructure, and improving the management of disposal sites through gas capture and utilization when feasible. We know that if those actions are implemented, meaning implementing organic diversion programs, improving the quality of disposal in cities, and using some of the byproducts of the organic treatment as biologically active cover, cities can deliver almost a 60% reduction by 2030 when implementing those actions. We are challenging cities to deliver half of that, aligned with the global methane pledge ambition, by also delivering cleaner, healthier, more resilient and inclusive cities. C40 has launched what we call the Pathway Towards Zero Waste, which is a political platform tailored to the developing world to accelerate sustainable waste systems in cities. And as was mentioned, this Pathway Towards Zero Waste was launched in our latest World Mayor Summit in Buenos Aires last week, where currently 13 cities have committed and created action plans to deliver those actions in line with the global methane pledge, and they'll implement citywide collection services, treating at least 30% of their organic waste and reducing their disposal emissions by 30%. We know that there is a lot of attention in methane and solid waste. Is a great sector to make significant contributions to the methane targets, specifically because cities are usually responsible for managing waste in almost every city in the world. And we know that there is huge potential and possibility for cities to deliver outstanding contributions to their national agendas by improving waste management. And C40 is committed to support those cities to implement those changes. I'll leave it at that, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. And thank you so much to WBA for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. It's always a great opportunity to see the perspective from the city side as well as the country by country side, and I think there's some really great work that's going on by C40 cities, and really excited to see how that one progresses too. I think we've got 5 minutes for questions, so I'd like to just invite all our panelists to turn on their videos and their microphones. I've tried to go through and maybe pick out some of the key questions, but it might be that we don't have time to answer them, but happy for us to coordinate any responses as well. I think just whilst we've still got Ricardo's presentation fresh in our heads, I'd like to just put a question to you that came up in the chat earlier. What are the cities that are leading the way towards zero waste? And what are they? Are they not only committing to reducing methane, but also doing already to address it? So which city do you see as delivering the best action so far?
Yeah, I think that one of the great advantages of the C40 Cities organization is that we get really close collaboration with cities around the world to know what they are doing. But the primary way of C40 of supporting those cities is by facilitating other cities to access that knowledge, to replicate those good ideas. And we see good things happening all around the world. We know that cities like Sao Paulo are implementing community-based programs to divert food waste and reduce the need for transportation at a community scale, engaging the communities in doing some of the treatment. We know that cities like San Francisco have led the way in implementing mandatory source segregation of organics for almost 20 years by now. We know that cities like Durban are showcasing how sanitary landfills can be managed in a way that they are net positive contributors to emission reductions, so that by managing space in a way that sinks carbon instead of emitting it is a model for cities to learn about how to properly manage disposal site. So we have good practices all over our membership and great things happening that we are also very happy to provide this platform to showcase those actions and facilitate them being replicated by other cities also committing to these targets.
That's great. I think it's really, really important as well. And that's one of the objectives that we have with the launch of pamphlets such as this, to really try and bring together case studies similar to yourselves, to just try and really demonstrate to other countries, cities that it is possible. And I think knowledge sharing is crucial going forward. I think just jumping on to the next question. So this is one for you, Tamar. How are methane reductions valued in Brazil? Is it subsidized?
Sorry, Leanne, could you repeat?
How are methane reductions valued in Brazil? Is it subsidized? So are there any supportive mechanisms or tariff payments to help drive methane reductions?
No, now we only have the voluntary market, carbon market, and we have the expectations for methane credit, as I mentioned in the presentation. Biogas has some really few incentives, but really few, and we don't have expectations for subsidies or much more incentives, since the country is not, the government is not really open to that. But there are some incentives to the plant's implementations, some tax exemptions for the energy, electricity, or for the biomethane. Really few, but there are some. And I'm free if someone has a need to understand more. Please contact me by LinkedIn or whatever. I can tell more.
Great. I think we have just time for one, maybe two more questions actually, that I've sort of highlighted. I think one for Matt. Someone was questioning the rationale behind why the anthropogenic methane emissions have gone up since 2000. I just wonder if you could maybe provide some insight from the GMI's perspective.
Yeah, well, I can't say I know the answer for sure, but I suspect it has to do with population growth and the fact that the interventions we've been doing have sort of not quite been keeping pace with some of that. So it's not just population, but development in general. And also in some part, maybe our knowledge of the issue is getting better. The measurements are getting better. Of course, some of that will be reflected in the back estimates, but yeah, I think it's a combination of things. It shows though that, it's an important issue, right? We're not on top of the problem. Basically, I think, the numbers are what they are, but we're clearly not on top of the problem. And, that's where, all these organizations like WBA and ours and others are, trying to work together and raise not just awareness, but action levels. I think that's the key thing, right? Like 2030 is coming, whether we like it or not. And hopefully we like that it's coming, but we may not like the result on methane if we don't take action quickly. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. I sort of, that's really my understanding of why those emissions have increased as well. I'm really sorry, we are actually out of time. I would just like to say a massive thank you to everybody who's joined today, all the panelists. Really, really appreciate it. And maybe next time we should probably leave a bit more of a space for having an in-depth conversation about some of these topics, because I think that you can go into quite a lot of detail. I just want to kind of wrap up by saying that WBA are going to be at COP27 this year. I think Charlotte's going to be there and presenting. My colleagues just put a link at the bottom, but we'll be exhibiting from the 14th to the 17th of November. And we are actually hosting a live event on the 17th. So you are able to actually join us there. For those of us that aren't able to go to Egypt, we can watch and keep up that way. So please do join us there. And just, yeah, big thank you to everybody. And please do reach out if you have any questions. Thank you very much all.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.